Hello everyone, I am Dr. M.Sc.Applied Patel, Coordinator, Psychology Wing, Directorate of Distance Education, ANNAMALAI University. First of all, I would like to get myself introduced to the participants of this program, M.Sc.Applied Psychology. Because in my humble opinion, I am of the belief that as participants, you should know something about your teacher, if not what he teaches. So, I repeat, I am Dr. M.Sc.Applied Patel, Course Coordinator, Psychology Wing, Director of Distance Education, ANNAMALAI University. And I would be giving lecture on Advanced Social Psychology. So, as of now, I have put on 23 years of teaching and research experience. I joined this university in the year 2000. All my degrees are in the field of psychology, my undergraduation, my post-graduation, my M.Phil and PhD. I have completed 3 major projects funded by University Grants Commission UGC and Indian Council for Social Science Research ICSSR. And I am pursuing one Indo-South African project on COVID-19, psychosocial aspects of COVID-19. And I have so far produced 8 PhD degrees. Presently, 6 people are pursuing their doctoral program under my supervision. And I have published around 35 research articles in various national and international journals. My area of specialization is social gerontology, old age aging. This is a brief curriculum vitae of mine. So I would like to commence my lecture. So I would be talking on advanced social psychology. So first unit, the field of social psychology. I would like to introduce the participants of this program to the syllabus of social psychology. First unit, the field of social psychology. Social psychology, a working definition. Focus on behavior of individuals. Social psychology, a capsule memory. Early years, its youth, 1970s and 1980s, 1990s and beyond. Research methods in social psychology. The experimental method, correlational method, social psychology and perennial skeptics. The importance of replication and multiple methods in social research. The role of theory in social psychology. This is the syllabus for Unit 1. So we are going into Unit 1. So the field of social psychology is a branch of psychology. In fact, it is an important branch of psychology. To understand the significance of social psychology, we should acquaint ourselves with the quote given by Aristotle, the teacher of Alexander the Great and the student of Plato, who was in turn the student of Socrates, the founder of Western philosophy or the father of Western philosophy. Aristotle once mentioned, man by nature is a social animal. This was a personal view of Aristotle, but today researchers in the field of social psychology confirm Aristotle was right by saying man by nature is a social animal. And if you go through any textbook on social psychology, many textbooks on social psychology contain this quote given by Aristotle, man by nature is a social animal. If you remove the word social, man by nature is an animal. So from this statement, you can understand the relevance, the importance of social psychology. Human beings are basically social beings. We are products of social interaction. The very identity of a man is through social network or social relationship with others. So first, let us see the definition of social psychology. Defining social psychology has always been a perplexing task for a scientist due to 2 factors. 1. The field's broad scope. The syllabus covered by social psychology is vast. Social perception, social cognition, discrimination, prejudice, group behavior. So the syllabus goes on and on. So the wide scope of this subject makes it difficult to define social psychology. The second factor, the rapid change that takes place in a given society makes defining social psychology a hectic task. Despite all difficulties, social psychologists have always attempted to define social psychology. Of course, no definition is final. things have been defined and redefined based on new innovations, based on new knowledge. However, social psychology is defined as a scientific field that seeks to understand the nature and causes of individual behavior, feelings and thoughts in social situation. This definition was given by Barron and Byron in 1989. So, if you ask me, as students of psychology, which is the best textbook or reference book for studying social psychology, I would prescribe the book by Barron and Byron. So, these two people have defined social psychology, I repeat, as a scientific field that seeks to understand the nature and causes of individual behavior, feelings and thoughts in social situation. Another way to put this is to say that social psychology investigates the way in which our thoughts, feelings and actions are influenced by social environments in which we live, by other people or our thoughts about them. So, in a nutshell, social psychology can simply be defined as a science of social interaction. From these definitions, one thing has to be understood, that social psychology is a science. In fact, of late we claim psychology to be a science. That is the reason why we have redefined psychology as a science of behavior. If you trace the origin of defining psychology, initially psychology was defined as a study of soul, it was defined as a study of mind, and it was also defined as a study of spirit. The concept of soul, spirit, mind may be real, just like we all speak about the concept of God. We believe in God, we visit places of worship, but the concept of God is a matter of personal belief. It falls outside the syllabus of science. Science requires evidence proof. So, when we proclaimed psychology to be a science, then the subject matter of psychology should be something that is verifiable, provable, above all it should be measurable, because quantification is the nature of science, measurement is the nature of science. You cannot come out with an example of a single scientific discipline that doesn't make use of measurement procedures. It is the application of mathematics and statistics that makes a discipline scientific. More scope for mathematical application, more scientific a discipline becomes. That is why we consider physics, chemistry, biology advanced sciences when compared to social sciences like sociology, psychology, economics, etc. So, since we claim psychology to be a science, we have redefined psychology as a science of behavior, because behavior is overt, but it includes covert behavior also. Behavior is something that can be observed, it can be reported, it can be measured objectively. So, we have redefined psychology as a science of behavior. In future, if a scientific methodology is made available to objectively prove the existence of mind, spirit or soul, we may also revert back to the earlier definition that it is a science of mind, spirit or soul. But as of now, we don't have any scientific methodology to prove the existence of mind, soul or spirit. So, we have redefined psychology as a science of behavior. Similarly, social psychology is a branch of science, it is a science. Scientific nature depends upon a set of values and methods. Science basically refers to methodology, objective methods for observing any naturally occurring phenomena, and when we report it free from personal bias and prejudice, that is what is meant by science. Scientific values refer to the preservation and promotion of certain qualities such as objectivity, free from personal bias, prejudice or subjectivity, honesty, openness, verifiable by everyone. Science has to work with everyone. It deals with universal facts, accountability, fairness and stewardships. These are some of the scientific values, and scientific methods refer to the process of establishing facts through testing and experimentation. So, anything in science should be verifiable, should be replicable, it should be verified by others also. That is the nature of science. Social psychology versus other social sciences. So, we all know that social psychology is a science of social behavior. In a nutshell, we saw that social psychology is a science of social interaction. it studies human behavior, but there are other social sciences which also do study human behavior. Then what is the difference between social psychology and other social sciences like sociology, which again addresses human behavior, anthropology, which studies culture and human behavior, political science, which studies human behavior, economics, which studies human behavior. So what is the difference between social psychology and other social sciences like sociology, anthropology, political science, economics, etc.? All social sciences study various aspects of social behavior. The major difference is in the level of analysis. When it comes to social psychology, it is at a micro level. Social psychology mainly focuses on individual behavior, whereas other social sciences is at the macro level. It mainly focuses on group behavior. So any social issue can be studied in social psychology, also is being studied in other social sciences, but the major difference is at the level of analysis. When it comes to studying any issue like poverty or any issue, marital relationship, any issue in social psychology, we focus upon the individual. Individual is considered primary in social psychology, but the same issues studied in other social sciences, the level of analysis is at a macro level. We give importance not to the individual but to the group. This is one major area of difference between social psychology and other social sciences. Understanding the causes of social behavior. Scholars have classified the causes of social behavior into 5 broad categories, namely the actions and characteristics of others. Next, cognitive processes. Next, environmental variables. Next, cultural context. Last, biological factors. So the etiology of social behavior can be classified into 5 broad categories. I repeat: the actions and characteristics of other people, 2, the cognitive processes, 3, environmental variables, 4, cultural context, 5, biological factors. Let us first see about the actions and characteristics of other people. What others say and do matters. Our social behavior is greatly influenced by the sayings and actions of other people. The mere presence and absence of others influence us. For example, imagine yourself, you are standing alone in a bus stop, awaiting a bus. You look around, nobody is available. You are the only person. Imagine how your behavior would be. Now, after some time, another person comes and stands besides you, not near to you, bit far away from you. He is also awaiting his bus. Now, the very presence of another person, will it influence your social behavior, your social cognition? Yes or no? Most of the answers would be yes. So the mere presence and absence of others will definitely influence our social behavior. Suppose if we are traveling in a bus, the bus is full, people are standing, you have a seat, you are sitting. Now in the next stop, you find a very elderly person boarding the bus. He comes and stands beside you. There is no seat, the bus is full. So what would be your reaction? Most likely you would get up and offer your seat to that elderly person. If it is a handicapped person, again you will do the same. So the mere presence of others is sufficient to influence our social behavior. So does the appearance of other people affect us, how others look like. Despite the warning to avoid judging book by its cover, many of us judge books by their covers. We know very well looks can be deceptive, but empirical evidences indicate we often are strongly affected by other people's appearances, how others look. So that is why we take precautions about our appearances to a great extent, especially when we go for some special occasions. Okay, first a job interview or a matrimonial what you call incident, So we take preparations, we care about our appearances a lot. This is also supported by empirical evidences. Research findings indicate that relying on others' appearance as a guide to their characteristics is not always wrong. So how you look and how you present yourself to others speaks a lot about your personality. So you cannot just deny that appearance has nothing to do with personality. In fact, there are researchers in the field of social psychology which do indicate that appearances as a guide to an individual's characteristics is not always wrong. At times it is correct also. The second cause of social behavior, cognitive processes. You go through any introduction to social psychology textbook, you will come across one chapter exclusively devoted to social cognition. So today is an era of cognitive psychology. If you go to places where awareness of psychological services is high, any problem encountered by an individual seeking appointment with a psychologist, if you ask him with whom you would like to have an appointment, they would respond that we would like to have an appointment with a cognitive psychologist. Today, the dominant school in psychology is the cognitive school. That is the reason why we have again redefined psychology as the science of behavior and cognitive processes or mental processes. This indicates the influence of cognitive school in the contemporary world. Social behavior is very much influenced by our memory and past experiences. So our learning, our past experiences, our memory plays a very crucial role in deciding our social behavior. Human beings are basically social beings, and we always try to make sense out of the social world. And while trying to interpret a social environment, we largely depend upon our memory and past experiences. This basic fact leads us to engage in a lot of social cognitions, to think long and hard about other people. For example, you have a friend and both of you have agreed to meet at a venue at a point of time, and you make yourself available at the fixed venue at the fixed point of time. You are awaiting your friend. Say for example, you are waiting from 5 p.m. in the evening at the appointed venue. It is 5:15, your friend has not arrived at the venue. 5:30, your friend has not arrived. 5:45, your friend has not arrived. Now you decide to leave the place with the expectation he is not going to come. When you are about to leave, suddenly your friend appears in the scene and he approaches you with a smile and says, "I am sorry, I forgot the appointment. Excuse me for the delay." What would be your reaction? You would be upset, you would be angry, you would respond aggressively. But again, this response will depend upon your memory. What your past experience with that friend of yours indicates, whether your friend is a serious or sincere person. In the past, was he a type of person who always kept his appointments? Is this the first time he is coming late? If this is the first time he is coming late, and if your memory indicates that he is a genuine person, serious person, sincere, then you may excuse him, forgive him, because this is the first time. If not, your memory tells you that he has never been serious with appointments and this is his usual tendency to come late, then your reaction would be different. Or now, suppose you are about to leave and your friend appears in the scene shabby, his shirt's torn, his pants torn, blood is bleeding, and he tells you, "Actually, I remembered the appointment, I was on time, in between I met with an accident. That is the reason for my delay. Despite that, I have somehow made it." Now your reaction would be different. So your memory, your past experiences to a great extent influences your social behavior. So social psychologists are well aware of the importance of social cognition upon social behavior. So what your mental processes or how your mental processes influences your behavior, social psychologists are well aware of that. In fact, social cognition is considered one of the most important areas of research in this field. Now, in social psychology, one important area of research is social cognition. I told you, today the dominant school in psychology is the cognitive school. It's an era of cognitive psychology. The third causes of social behavior, environmental variables, the impact of the physical world. Behavior and environment in reality are two inseparable entities. Honestly speaking, it is for our convenience we discriminate between these two variables, behavior and environment, and we define behavior, we define environment, but in reality they are two entities inseparable. Behavior takes place in relation to some environment. Behavior and environment are inseparable. A behavior is appropriate or inappropriate depends upon the environment in which it occurs. Environment changes, meaning of the behavior also changes. Suppose I am giving a lecture in a classroom, and me giving a lecture in a classroom is highly relevant, appropriate behavior, because that environment is meant for that. Imagine the environment changes. It's not a classroom, it's a marketplace, but still my behavior is the same. I continue to give lecture. The same behavior which was considered appropriate, relevant in a classroom now becomes irrelevant, because this behavior of mine giving a lecture is not meant to take place in a market environment. You can understand the importance of the relationship between behavior and environment. It is the environment that makes behavior appropriate or inappropriate, normal or abnormal, meaningful or meaningless. Research findings indicate that the physical environment does indeed influence our feelings, thoughts and behavior. So these variables too certainly fall within the realm of modern social psychology. In fact, there is a branch of social psychology which is known as environmental psychology or eco-psychology, which emerged during the middle of 1970s to investigate the role of physical environment. When I say physical environment, it includes both natural and man-made environment upon social behavior. Social reasons for social behavior is dealt with social psychology. What about the non-social causes of social behavior? Social behavior due to physical causes or the physical environment, that is dealt by environmental psychology, which was an offshoot of social psychology. The field of environmental psychology is replete with empirical evidences that the physical environment influences our social behavior to a great extent. There are research studies which indicate even the color of the hospital wall influences the recovery of the patient. The color of the classroom influences the attention level of the students, the personal space, the seating arrangement. So everything influences the attention of the student. So there are number of physical environmental factors that play a crucial role when it comes to social behavior, and there is a science, environmental psychology, exclusively devoted for investigating the role of physical environment upon social behavior. The fourth cause, cultural context. Social psychologists are of the view that man lives in culture like a fish lives in water. This is a very significant statement. A fish can never live out of water. Water is everything for a fish. The fish doesn't even know that there is a world beyond water. For fish, life begins and ends in water. It cannot contemplate or think or even imagine something beyond water. That much of influence our culture has upon us. But we are unaware of that. Just like a fish which doesn't know it lives in water, we human beings are unaware of the fact that every aspect of our behavior is influenced by our culture. Culture is very powerful and it gets transmitted from one generation to another generation. Culture refers to shared perception, shared belief, shared way of living by a group of people confined to some geographical location that facilitates adapting to that environment, which has existed for many generations. It has been transmitted from one generation to another generation. Everything is culturally determined. The language which we speak, the dress which we wear, the foods which we eat, our beliefs, our rituals, everything is culturally determined. This we realize when we move from one culture to another culture. Then we realize the impact of our culture upon us. It is said that behavior does not occur in a cultural vacuum. The cultural context where a behavior takes place is what makes that behavior normal or abnormal. Because some behavior which is considered normal in one culture is viewed abnormal in another culture. So culture is very powerful. We cannot think outside culture. Only when we move or when we migrate from one cultural environment to another cultural environment, we realize the important influence our culture has upon us or had upon us. Okay. So culture is very crucial and exerts tremendous influence on our life. Behavior doesn't occur in a cultural vacuum. The cultural context where a behavior takes place is very, very important. The cultural context in which behavior occurs gives meaning to it. Otherwise, behavior appears to be meaningless. It is the context that gives meaning to the behavior. Barker's two-way ecological approach. It is not the environment. It is not just the environment, because the environment everywhere is almost similar. You go to your home, you have windows, doors, ceiling and floor. You go to your office, you have the same physical infrastructure. You go to a shopping mall, you go to a theater. The physical infrastructure, the physical environment is almost similar, but the behavior is different. The behavior in your home is something very different from your behavior in office, which is again very different from your behavior in a theater or a shopping mall, because of the cultural interpretation we give for that environment. It is not just the environment that decides our behavior. It is the cultural interpretation we give to our environment that determines our behavior. Suppose there is an environment and I interpret that as a classroom. So I behave in accordance with the decorum of a classroom. If I fail to interpret that physical environment as a classroom, my behavior will not be in accordance with the decorum of a classroom. If I go to my house, I interpret that as my home, so my behavior is according to that. If I go to a shopping mall, I interpret that as a shopping mall and my behavior will be accordingly. Suppose there is a classroom in a university where I am giving a class. Presently, imagine I am giving a class in hall number 205. Tomorrow, the Vice Chancellor of that university issues an order that this classroom 205, tomorrow 10 a.m. onwards is going to be a canteen or a cafeteria. So today, I have interpreted this environment as a classroom and my behavior is in accordance with the classroom decorum. But tomorrow, the same physical environment will be interpreted by me not as a classroom but as a cafeteria or a canteen, and my behavior will be different from what it is now or what it is today. So it is not just the environment, it is the cultural interpretation which we give for the environment that influences our behavior. Barker says behavior influences environment, environment also influences behavior. There are two ways of coping with an environment. One is accommodation, the other one is assimilation. Accommodation refers to we change our behavior so that we cope up with the demands of the environment. Assimilation, we modify the environment so that it suits our persona or personality. There is a school in psychology. The science of psychology has number of schools like psychoanalytical school, behaviorism, from which we get the very definition that psychology is a science of behavior. Then you have humanistic school, you have existentialism, you have structuralism, functionalism, you have Gestalt psychology, and the offshoot of Gestalt psychology is cognitive psychology, which is the dominant school in psychology today. So Gestalt psychology speaks about the relevance of environment, the relationship between behavior and environment, or it speaks about how significant perception is because our behavior, our cognition largely is influenced by our perception. So the philosophy, the ultimate philosophy of Gestalt school is the whole is always greater than the sum of the parts. Adding the parts can never become equal to the whole. Whole is always greater than the sum of the parts. Suppose imagine there is a car parked outside your house. You see the car. Now I dismantle the car part by part, but all the parts that made the car is still dumped there. Now I tell you, look, there is a car. You won't be able to see the car. But all the parts of the car still remains there, but the car has disappeared because it is not in a holistic form. So the whole is always greater than the sum of the parts. This is what Gestalt psychology emphasizes. This is the ultimate philosophy of Gestalt psychology. They speak about figure and background principle. Behavior is related to a given environment, and our behavior is based upon what is known as figure and background principle. For example, we are in a classroom, I am giving a lecture, it is an environment, and you remain focused upon my lecture. So for you all, I am the figure. All other things in that environment apart from me becomes part of the background. The board, the windows, the door, the desk, the tables, the chairs, everything is part of the background. Even your fellow classmate is part of your background. For you, I am the figure, and for me, you are the figure. All other things is part of my background. This is how the process goes on. When the class is going on, we suddenly hear a scream in the corridors. Someone is screaming and running in the corridors. We shift our attention towards that person who is running in the corridors. At that point of time, the person who is screaming and running in the corridors becomes the figure for you and me. And I become part of your background, you again become part of my background. Now, after that person has left, I say, okay, let us continue the class. I shift my attention back to you, you shift your attention back. So the fifth causes of social behavior is biological factors. This may appear interesting to many of you. Is social behavior influenced by biological processes and genetic factors? In the past, most social psychologists would have answered no, at least to genetic part of this question. Now, however, many have come to believe that our preferences, behaviors, emotions, and even attitudes are affected to some extent by our biological inheritance. Man is the product of heredity and environment. Behavior is the function of heredity and environment. So there is a branch of biology, I don't know how many of you must be aware of that. It is known as sociobiology. I repeat, it is a branch of biology. According to sociobiology, the sole purpose in life of all organisms, all species, is to ensure that our genes get transmitted from one generation to another generation. So this is the sole purpose. We live just in order to make sure that we transmit our genes to the subsequent generation. All our behaviors, whatever may be their direction, intensity, all our behaviors are justified based on the sole purpose, the purpose of procreation. So we live to make sure that we transmit our genes to the subsequent generation. the sexual behavior that is prevalent across all species is cited as an example to justify this purpose according to sociobiology. Social psychologists, they partially agree with what is being formulated by social biologists. Partially they disagree. So the agreement part between social psychologists and sociobiologists, yes, there are certain social behaviors which do have genetic inheritance. Some of our social behaviors are genetically inherited. But according to sociobiology, any behavior that is genetically inherited is permanent, cannot be altered or changed. Social psychologists disagree with this hypothesis. According to psychology, you see, the three major goals of psychology is to understand human behavior, predict human behavior, and to control human behavior. Controlling human behavior is one major goal of psychology. So psychologists, they did not agree with the argument of sociobiologists that behaviors due to genetic inheritance cannot be altered. Any behavior, according to psychologists, can be controlled, can be altered, can be changed. So this was the area of disagreement. So this disagreement paved way for birth of a new discipline, a new science called evolutionary social psychology. Evolutionary social psychology is an offshoot of social psychology, and it investigates the role of genetic factors on social behavior. It is a budding science. Numerous researches are being done in the field of evolutionary social psychology, which is known as evolutionary psychology. So there are a number of studies on mate preferences which indicate that gender difference, mate preference is based on gender difference. Men and women, when they go for mate selection, they emphasize on certain factors. What women look forward in their life partner, what men look forward in their life partner, there is a difference, and this difference is attributed to gender difference. Women, when they go for mate selection, mate preference, they give importance to factors like dominance, powerful tendencies. So they place more emphasis on dominance, factors like dominance, whereas men, when they go for mate preferences, they give importance to physical beauty, youthfulness, and this difference is attributed to gender difference. Now we go to another topic, research methods in social psychology. We saw at the very beginning that social psychology is a science, and when I say science, it primarily refers to methodology, methods. So there are many methods that are being used by researchers in social psychology to study social behavior, but of all the methods, two methods are very popular, namely, one, the experimental method, number two, the correlational method. These methods are very popular, though there are other methods which are being used by researchers in the field of social psychology to study social phenomena, but these two methods are very popular. First, let us see what is an experimental method. This is the foremost method in science which provides insight on the cause and effect relationship between two or more variables. The experimental method is the most preferred method by any scientist in any field of science. Only for some reason, when it is not feasible to adopt the experimental method in their research, scientists, they go for other methods. any scientist in any discipline gives priority for the experimental method. A reason, it is through the experimental method it is feasible to know the cause and effect relationship between two or more variables. When I study a phenomena using the experimental method, it is possible for me to establish A is the cause and B is the effect. A causes B. This I can tell only if I study the phenomena using the experimental method. So, experiments usually are conducted in controlled environments, laboratories. So, in experimental method, when it is conducted in labs, it gives complete control over the variables to the experimenter or the researcher. There are other experimental methods like field experiments, quasi experiments, but usually experiments are conducted in labs, and when experiments are done in labs, it gives advantage for the experimenter where he can exercise complete control over the variables he studies. So, normally experiments involves three variables. First, let us see what is meant by a variable. Variable is anything that varies or anything that can assume numerical values, anything that can be quantified. So, I told you the nature of science is quantification. There is no science without quantitative data. To be frank, leading a life in this world without numbers is near to impossible. In this world, everything is in the form of quantitative data: age, weight, height, distance, business transactions. Even suppose as students you write your exam, the exam which you write is a qualitative data, and in the name of evaluation, what we do is we quantify that qualitative data. So, it is possible for us to come to an inference regarding our ranking. That is possible only when we quantify data: who's rank 1, who's rank 2, who's first class, who's second class, who has passed, who has failed. This is possible only when we quantify data. So, anything that can be measured is a variable. So, there are three different types of variable. One is the independent variable, which is also known as the experimental variable. So, this experimental variable, in any given experiment, the experimental variable is the variable which the researcher or the experimenter controls, manipulates, alters. Deliberately they alter this variable. So, in an experiment, the variable that is being controlled, altered, changed by the experimenter or researcher is known as the independent variable. It is also known as the experimental variable. The other variable is the dependent variable. In an experiment, the variable that is being observed by the experimenter or the researcher, the variable which is being measured, that variable is known as the dependent variable. So, in an experiment, basically there are two variables. One is the independent variable, also known as the experimental variable. The other one is the dependent variable, which is also known as the measured variable. So, as an experimenter, I will be altering the independent variable. Subsequently, I will be measuring the dependent variable. So, the impact or the influence of the independent variable will be felt on the dependent variable. This is what I do in an experiment. This is what I do in an experiment. Suppose, for example, as a researcher in social psychology, I am interested to know whether crowding causes aggressive behavior. I just wanted to know, is crowding the cause and aggressive behavior the effect? So, conventional wisdom, common sense indicates that normally in a crowded environment, people tend to behave aggressively. And empirical studies in social psychology also have indicated similar findings. So, I as a researcher wanted to know, is crowding the cause and aggressive behavior the effect? Does crowding causes aggressive behavior? Okay, so in this experiment, crowding is the independent variable and aggressive behavior is the dependent variable. As an experimenter, I will be manipulating the density of the crowd and subsequently measure aggressive behavior. So suppose for example in a classroom with a capacity of 50 students, I will make 25 students sit and measure their aggressive behavior. I will increase that to 50 students and again measure the aggressive behavior. Now I will make 75. In a classroom capacity of 50, I make sit 75 students and I measure aggressive behavior. Then I increase it to 100. Again measure aggressive behavior. 125, measure aggressive behavior. 150, measure aggressive behavior. Then I decrease. I make it 125, measure aggressive behavior. I make it 100, measure aggressive behavior. I make it 75, measure aggressive behavior. Now I make it 50, measure aggressive behavior. And 25, measure aggressive behavior. I repeat it again and again many times. And subsequently I measure aggressive behavior. And if my findings indicate whenever the density of the crowd increases or increased, aggressive behavior also increased. When the density decreased, aggressive behavior also decreased. Then from my experiment, I can come to the conclusion crowding causes aggressive behavior. Now, there is an issue. There is another variable that is known as extraneous variable. It is nicknamed as a nuisance variable because in any experiment, for the experimenter, this extraneous variable appear as a nuisance. They interfere with the experimental outcome. They may lead to what is called experimental error, or they may lead to what you call false inferences. So the success of any experiment depends on the extent to which the experimenter or researcher controls or takes precautions to control these extraneous variables. And what are these extraneous variables? They are also independent variables, but they are labeled extraneous variables because right now they are beyond the scope of the present experiment. They are outside the scope of the present experiment, because as an experimenter, I am conducting an experiment to identify the cause of aggressive behavior. I just wanted to know whether crowding causes aggressive behavior. Crowding is the independent variable, aggressive behavior is the dependent variable, but there are other factors which can also cause aggressive behavior. For example, food habits. Non-vegetarian people tends to behave aggressively than vegetarians. Culture. There are certain cultures who celebrate bravery. In people from those cultural background, they tend to behave more aggressively than people from other cultural background. Gender difference. Men are more aggressive than women. So there are age may be factor. Young people are more aggressive than elderly people. So there are other causes for aggressive behavior. But as an experimenter, right now, I am not concerned about any other cause of aggressive behavior. I just wanted to know whether crowding causes aggressive behavior. My experiment, I just wanted to establish a cause and effect relationship between crowding and aggressive behavior. I am not concerned about other factors of aggressive behavior. So now, I have to take precautions to make sure that other factors like culture, age, gender, food habits, they don't influence aggressive behavior. So I should permit only one independent variable to operate, that is crowding. All other independent variables that may lead to aggressive behavior should be kept in abeyance. So if gender is one reason, I can go for a sample exclusively belonging to one gender. All my samples are males, all my samples are females. Or if it is food habits, then I can go for a sample selection all vegetarian or all non-vegetarian. If it is culture, then I can take samples belonging to the same culture. Likewise, I can nullify the impact of other independent variables which may cause aggressive behavior, and in my experiment I permit only one independent variable, that is crowding, to influence. So I can conclude that crowding has caused aggressive behavior. This is what? So the same problem which I have studied using experimental method can also be studied using a correlational method. This is another method that is popularly used by researchers in the field of social psychology, correlational method. So, in correlational research design, it investigates the relationship between variables without the researcher controlling or manipulating any of them. So, I objectively report, that's all. So, in a correlational study, I can just report whether there is a relationship between two or more variables. If there is a relationship, whether that relationship is a significant relationship, or what is the nature of relationship, whether that relationship is a positive relationship or a negative relationship. Suppose crowding and aggressive behavior, I study using the correlational method. I can say there is a relationship, significant relationship between crowding and aggressive behavior, or I can say it is a positively significant relationship between crowding and aggressive behavior. When I say positive relationship, when crowding increases, aggressive behavior increases. When crowding decreases, aggressive behavior also decreases. This is what is known as positive relationship. When crowding increases, aggressive behavior decreases. When aggressive behavior increases, crowding decreases. This is called negative relationship. When I study a phenomena using correlational method, I can just state whether there is a relationship or not, if there is a relationship, whether it is significant or not, or whether the relationship is positive or negative. And this nature of relationship is usually indicated through correlational coefficient value. So, this correlational range usually is between +1 to -1. Normally, it comes in decimals. So, based upon this correlational coefficient value, we can indicate that whether the relationship between two or more variables is positive or negative. But a cause and effect relationship cannot be established. It can be done only using a experimental method. Now, other methods in social psychology. Converging operations. This is another method that is also used by researchers in social psychology. Converging operation suggests that if a particular variable affects the aspect of social behavior by influencing an underlying psychological mechanism, then other variables that influence the same mechanism should produce similar effects on behavior. For example, from existing body of empirical literature, I found that A causes B. And there is another body of empirical literature which also points out B causes C. Then based on these two body of empirical literature, I can come to an inference A causes C. For example, in social psychology, we speak about mood congruent effect. Our behavior largely depends upon our mood. If you know the mood of an individual, you can easily predict the outcome behavior. So, for example, there is empirical literature which indicates consuming sweets, toffees, chocolates leads to happiness or positive mood. There is a body of empirical literature which indicates people consuming chocolates improves their mood, makes them happy. And there is another body of empirical literature which indicates that people, when they are happy, they indulge in what is known as pro-social behavior or helping behavior. Whenever people are in happy mood, the tendency to help others more relatively. So, based on these two empirical body of literature, I can come to a conclusion and inference A causes C. So, consuming sweets leads to pro-social behavior or helping behavior. This is called converging operations. This is also a method that is used by researchers in the field of social psychology. Next one, meta-analysis. It is analysis beyond analysis, like metaphysics. The researchers combine the findings from multiple studies to draw an overall conclusion. Independent studies already completed. Using a statistical technique, you combine the results of independent studies done in the past, and you try to predict the trend across different studies. You arrive at inferences, conclusions by combining the outcome of independent research studies done in the past. So the result of many independent studies are combined through a statistical procedure and inferences are arrived. But there are criticism against this method. Some of the researchers, they don't endorse meta-analysis. They say it is like combining apples and oranges. Apples are different, oranges are different. They cannot be combined. So every independent study or combining different studies by different scientists and trying to arrive at inferences is just like combining apples and oranges. They don't endorse this. So thank you. So in this lecture I have covered a few topics from Unit 1, Applied Social Psychology. Thank you. Wish you all the best.